I'm your host, Michelle Rowlinson, and today we're diving into a symptom that might surprise some of you, but it's one that I've personally experienced and heard from many others about: travel anxiety during menopause. Whether it's driving, flying, or using public transport, anxiety that suddenly seems to come out of nowhere can have a huge impact. And if you're going through menopause or perimenopause, you might be feeling this too. For today's episode, I'll be sharing my own experience with travel anxiety, particularly how my confidence behind the wheel took a nosedive. And we'll talk about how hormonal changes during menopause can be a factor in and why this is happening to so many women. So let's jump in. I passed my driving test when I was 18, and I've always been a confident driver. In fact, within a week of passing my test, I was driving long distances, 4 or 5 hours up north on the motorway to see family. I never thought twice about it. In fact, I actually enjoyed driving. It gave me a sense of freedom and independence. And parking, well, also no problems. But then one day, everything changed. I remember it so clearly. I was reverse parking on a hill in my local town, something I'd done plenty of times before. But it was when I was manoeuvring in that my legs just gave out. They turned to jelly, and suddenly I was stuck, halfway in the road, half in the parking space, frozen with intense fear. I couldn't move because I was terrified of rolling back into the car behind me. I'd never had an issue with clutch control before, never rolled into another car, but suddenly that fear was overwhelming. It took all my strength to pull myself together and park the car. I thought maybe it's just a one-off, and that once I went for a walk and did my shopping, I'd shake it off. But when I got back to the car, that same hit in the stomach feeling was still there. I was scared to pull out in case I rolled the car into the car behind me. It was crazy. I almost called my partner to come and get the car out for me, but I didn't want to admit that I couldn't handle it. I mean, you know, like I said, I'd been a confident driver for years. I think it was pride that stopped me from making that call, knowing that I'd never hear the end of it. Eventually, after about 30 minutes, I managed to finally get the car out. But this fear is kind of stuck with me. At the time, I didn't know it was I didn't know I was perimenopausal, so I didn't connect the dots. I thought maybe it was just a fluke, or that I'd suddenly developed this irrational fear. But since then, through my support groups and workshops, I've realised this is way more common than I'd ever imagined. It wasn't until much later that I started sort of piecing it all together and realised what was really going on. The anxiety, that fear of something happening that I'd never worried about before, it wasn't just random. It was linked to the hormonal changes of menopause. When I started talking about this to other women, I found out I wasn't alone. So many women shared similar stories of sudden travel anxiety during menopause. Things like avoiding driving at night or avoiding large roundabouts, which is something else I've found. I'm definitely more anxious on those massive roundabouts you find near motorways. But it doesn't stop at driving. Some women have developed a fear of public transport. One woman told me how she now avoids taking trains and hasn't even told her daughter about it, as she's always making excuses to her daughter for her to come and visit rather than her get the train to her daughter. And flying. I've heard from quite a few women who say they used to love flying to go on holiday, but during menopause, this sudden fear of flying has kicked in out of nowhere. They find themselves now avoiding trips or even turning down holidays that they would have jumped at a few years ago. So what's going on here? Why do so many of us suddenly develop these travel-related fears?